Wagwan, everybody. Welcome to the Dis Affamie History podcast, where we'll be speaking about history and as well family history and how history relates in terms of Caribbean people for the present as well as in the past, and how in the past what that does and brings forth for what we are going through at present and what we can learn from our history, from our family, and take that moving forward. So I do hope you enjoy the podcast, and if you like it, please ensure to subscribe, like, and review. Thank you.
Our guest today is Sandra Taitt Eddy, is a genealogist, family historian, and educator, the founder of the Baobab Genealogy Society. So let's have a listen with your host, Wendy Aris and Sandra Taitt Eddy, on this path of discovery of family history.
The reasoning or the significance behind naming the group the Baobab Genealogy Society.
So thank you for having me. I am excited to always talk about genealogy and its impact. I am looking at Baobab as a symbol of history and heritage and resilience. And that's why I chose it. I went to school in Barbados at St. Michael's Girls' School, which is very close to Queen's Park, where a baobab tree is located. And as school children, they would take us to the park, and this tree was just the most fascinating thing I'd ever seen. The trunk is huge. It was just one of those things you could hold hands around the trunk as a class. And it always left a huge impression on me, even before I understood or appreciated that this was considered the tree of life. And such a symbol of strength and such a symbol of resilience. And it reminded me, frankly, of the experience and the nature of the African diaspora, our strength, our resilience, the fact that we represent, as science lets us know, the first of humankind, and we have some of the deepest roots. And in addition, the tree, the top of the tree, the branches resemble roots as well. And some people in its native spaces refer to it as the upside down tree, because the roots and the tree's branches kind of resemble. So there's a lot of symbolism to the baobab tree, and I just thought it was perfect for genealogy purposes to use that name.
Oh, that's fantastic. And then what was, I guess, your mission? What is the mission of the Baobab
So
group?
the primary mission when I came up with the Baobab Genealogy Society was to become a nonprofit where I just saw the potential for genealogy to have impact in schools and in community and just about every historical institution. And I wanted to make sure that I was positioned to bring that knowledge that I had gained from doing years and years of genealogy to these community groups and organizations.
No, that's great. And then I guess what are some of the main activities when you go out, or projects that you're undertaking under the Baobab Society?
Correct. So seminars, workshops, with how to trace their own family, sometimes providing that service for them myself, working with television groups, working with radio, any way that I can impact and get the message out in community about the importance of preserving and unearthing and sharing about our ancestry and about our contributions that we have made to society.
That's great. And then, of course, how does the Baobab Group Society then engage with, local community within Barbados and, of course, within the diaspora?
Right. So we have done online, both virtual and in-person activities. Each year, we do the annual Genealogy Emancipation Day event. And I picked that specifically because I believe that genealogy, particularly of the English-speaking Caribbean, and even the African diaspora in the US, that's a really special time for us to observe one of the most significant events in our history. And as genealogy goes, it was Emancipation Day that the colonial governments began to treat us as human in their church records, right? And began to assign more Christianized names as opposed to the nicknames and just single names. That's when the churches would recognize formal marriages for us. And so emancipation was such a significant time for Black families that I really felt it was important to do something on that day to highlight that significance and the importance of that event. Though it didn't occur in an instant, it was just the fact that, you know, we fought for freedom and it eventually came. And that, to me, is as significant as our attaining and achieving our independence from colonial rule.
Oh, it sure is. It definitely sure is. And when someone is first starting with genealogy, it's always good to speak with the elders. What else would you say that can be used or discussed about to further enhance that discussion?
So my biggest piece of advice is to ensure that we come across as authentic, because the one thing we want to do is put the elders at ease that our motives are pure and that we're doing this to honor them and that we're not looking to dig up dirt. Because I think that's the number one concern when we go to people and say, tell me your personal information, right? I think it's also important to have some information that they will be familiar with and that they will know that the only way you can know this is because you have been doing some due diligence. So have the name of someone that they know, have a place name. And the other thing is to allow them to speak. Oftentimes, I have had experiences where people say, I don't know anything, you know. But when I keep them talking, they begin to discover they know a whole lot more than they thought they knew. And a lot of it has to do with providing the information that will trigger memories for them. And then they will just become fluent in sharing. So that's my advice. Bring along pictures, anything at all to show that this is not just, you fishing for information, but that you've actually put some investment in.
No, I can definitely say that that is fabulous advice, because I know when I first reached out to some people and I had other information, they were surprised that I even knew that information. So it does really, solidify that conversation when you have it. And what would you say are some of the challenges or obstacles faced when researching your family history, especially from Barbados?
Barbados, we actually have some of the best records relative to family history and some very long history dating back to the early 17th century. So we actually are the ideal place to get information, particularly relative to the English colonization of Barbados. Relative to the enslaved population, we have the slave registers, which are particularly informative. And we also have evidence that we can cull from plantation inventories, plantation deeds. We have, for the enslaved population, we have oral tradition in our family. And we have, my challenge is that we don't lose a lot of the oral tradition. A lot of our history wasn't written down or documented, and certainly a lot of it not from our perspective. And that's where I believe getting the oral histories is so critical, because that would be from our perspective. And also even for people like me to begin to write what we have discovered and make that also available to the public. So there's lots available in the academic world about the enslavement of Africans in the Caribbean and Barbados in particular. However, the family history, those personal stories, are the ones that we want to focus on, because enough of those does give us a national picture of how the people of African descent were impacted. So the challenge is time, and the challenge is to get to those elders while we have the opportunity to get that information from them, and to share, and to even show them the respect that they do, given they basically whose shoulders we're standing on.
Definitely. And would you be able to share, I guess, any interesting or surprising historical insights that your society has been involved with at all?
I think earlier I talked about the genealogical event on Emancipation Day. That would be, for me, really significant for me. Discovering individuals in your family who have had like significant roles in the development of our countries is super important. I discovered, for example, that I have a great grandfather. I knew about him through oral tradition, but he was one of the more prolific Pentecostal itinerant preachers in Barbados. I go to church. Church is important to me, so that's significant for me to know. I also think it's significant that by the end of slavery, there were only 7% or so of the population that was still African born. So discovering someone in the records where they're identified as African born can be particularly important. And there's so much. I mean, Barbados was the hub of the British slave trade. So any new information that we can find to add to that narrative, the survival of our people, the things they went through, the things that they overcame, right? And to put a face on the struggle, I think will help to broaden our perspectives and also our respect for our heritage.
Definitely. And what would you say would be some of the common either pitfalls or misconceptions that when someone is researching their family history should be aware of?
I think in the age of digital research, avoid the temptation to just utilize an online family tree without vetting the information, without cross-referencing to make sure that the person who put that tree on there is actually doing it because they did the research. And I find often people are assuming that the trees they find online have been done by people with research background experience, and they can often be going down rabbit holes and find out later that it's not correct. The British circulated, a few names, and oftentimes, I think naming is a big pitfall, because people will see a name and it matches the name that they have, and you're going down the wrong rabbit hole. You have to cross-reference at as many points as possible to ensure that you have the person that you are looking for.
No,
Also,
definitely.
yes. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. No, I just agreeing with what your point was.
And another one is that sometimes we will get people coming to us with family history narratives, and what they're basically asking us to do is to validate the narrative. And sometimes we discover a completely different narrative. So it's important to keep an open mind that the family story may be different than what you have believed, right? And I think that happens a lot. One of the ones that I refer to is that there are grandparents who will say, yeah, my grandmother, she come from Scotland. And everyone will assume that it's Scotland and England. Well, there is a portion of Barbados that we refer to as Scotland district. It even had the Scotland River. And so I think sometimes we can be disappointed to learn that the Scotland isn't Scotland in the UK, it's Scotland locally. And then you may find that rather than, a Scottish ancestor, you have an enslaved ancestor that was enslaved in Scotland and Barbados. Yeah. So yeah, just making sure that we have the evidence to support the things that we have heard.
Definitely. And I know we've talked about it a number of times during this discussion, but really, how important are oral histories in genealogical research?
I mean, it's important for everyone, but it's especially important in African diaspora communities where, written work is less available that was written by our people. And so we have to rely on the oral and the verbal and the stories that are being handed down and preserve those stories. So oral traditions are super important. Also, sometimes if we don't have an oral tradition, we may neglect to look at certain record groups, right? So for example, if my grandmother didn't say that Uncle Clifford died as a result of the war, I may not look at war records, right? Because that World War I, is a long way behind us. And it was her saying that made me consult the war records, right? So those stories, I may not have known that Uncle John went up to Canada to work in Sydney, Cape Breton in 1914, had she not provided that story. So it's really good to listen to the oral traditions, write everything down, and not only do we sometimes see that the story is different, sometimes we find that the story is absolutely true, and then we can expand on the story from the evidence we find in the record. It's also important because the issue of the issue of undocumented people, right, plagues us a lot. And because we were undocumented, we have to value, even if the traditional historical institutions aren't valuing our oral traditions, we have to value our oral traditions, because those standards that the historical community has are apt to change as time goes on, right? So I would definitely, and it's African to storytell, right, and to pass things down. And so that's a retention even from Africa that we need to be conscious of.
Oh, for
The fact
sure.
that we storytell and give oral tradition is a part of our history.
Oh, it definitely is. It definitely is. And as you said, most of our ancestors are not documented. So that's why we definitely need to really value and to honor those oral traditions. And I know as we come to a close on this discussion, what would be, I guess, your final thoughts for anyone researching their family history that wasn't discussed during this talk?
So I think it's really important. Well, I think a byproduct of doing genealogy research is that it can grab your attention and possibly create a pathway for you to learn about the social history of the places where your ancestors lived. Oftentimes you find yourself wondering, well, what was going on when this record was created? You want the social history context for what was going on at the time. I think it can make us curious about, why we were migrant people. Why did this one go here? What happened when that one went there? It just pulls you in and makes you want to know more. And I think we should embrace the journey. I think that allows us to connect with lost history and lost family members. I love seeing when people are saying, hey, I went to England and I met up with a cousin that I found through doing my family history. I think keeping detailed records, making sure we're documented, and also citing, where did you find the source? So someone coming behind you can go back and validate and look at what you did. And just having curiosity and respect for the past and the fact that there's a connection between the past, the present, and the future. I think history serves two purposes, and one is to add to or to improve on what our ancestors did, but also to learn from, those areas that perhaps were not so good. And when we talk about enslaved ancestors, recognizing the trauma that they endured and how the coping habits as a result of that trauma, we want to make sure that those that no longer serve us, we're not passing on. So history then informs us of what we need to change and what we need to build on. And so there is definitely a serious side to this, but it's also fun. It's absolutely fun, as you know, to do a family tree, and you can get the bug, and it's a lifelong pursuit. It never ends. We have 32 great grandparents. So this could potentially be a lifelong activity. And also make sure you journey to these places and walk in the steps of the ancestors.
Oh, absolutely. That's a great point. And you're absolutely right in terms of it does open up that box of curiosity and you just can't close it. And definitely with the traveling, I am definitely, one can say, yes, I've definitely traveled to where they are and or where they have walked, and, making plans to go elsewhere, wherever they have been as well. So no, thank you so much, Sandra. I really do appreciate your time for coming on, speaking to what you know, and further adding and helping others to be able to do research and to what to look for as well. So thank you so much.
I am honored, and thank you for the work that you're doing as well.
Thank you.
Hoped you enjoyed this episode, and if you did, please make sure to like, follow, subscribe, and write a review for the episode wherever you listen to your podcasts. Thank you.